words they've used about David's demeanor in that courtroom. They've described it as off, as sociopathic.
Inside the murder case against the singer, David.
Crime that we are dealing with is incredibly horrific and barbaric.
Prosecutors allege David killed this 14-year-old because she threatened to expose their illegal relationship, and that would have threatened his career.
I 100% believe in my heart and know in my heart he did this.
Here's a complete recap of the shocking preliminary hearing before the once rising star David heads
A
to trial.
21-year-old R&B singer known professionally as David is officially headed to trial. This week, a Los Angeles County judge ruled that the case against David Anthony Burke will move forward after a preliminary hearing that stretched across 5 days and into a second week. The charges: first-degree murder with special circumstances, continuous sexual abuse of a minor, and unlawful mutilation. The alleged victim was 14 years old. Her name was Celeste Rivas Hernandez, and for the first time, the hearing gave the public a detailed look at the evidence prosecutors say ties Burke to her death.
21-year-old R&B sensation David Anthony Burke, known professionally as the singer David, is officially headed to trial. That's what a Los Angeles County judge ruled just this week after a lengthy preliminary hearing that stretched into a second week. We've been following this case for months, since the body of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez was found in September 2025 in the front trunk of David's Tesla after it was towed from the Hollywood Hills. And we've reported on the details. The autopsy report, the grand jury proceedings, the arrest, but now, through the preliminary hearing, we're finally learning key details about the case against David, and prosecutors say it's damning.
Here's how this case became public. In September 2025, Burke's Tesla had been sitting abandoned on a street in the Hollywood Hills for weeks. It was eventually towed. At the tow yard, workers noticed a smell coming from the vehicle. When officials opened the front trunk, they found a heavily decomposed, dismembered body. About a week later, the medical examiner identified the remains as Celeste Rivas Hernandez, 14 years old.
Let's begin with the basics. This is 21-year-old David Anthony Burke, known professionally as David, D4VD. He rose to fame as a Gen Z singer in 2022 for his hit song Romantic Homicide that peaked at number 33 on the Billboard Hot 100. It's ironic now that David rose to fame for the song Romantic Homicide, as he's now charged with homicide, first-degree murder to be exact. This charge stems from a dismembered body that was found in the front trunk of David's Tesla on September 8th, 2025. For weeks, the Tesla had been abandoned, parked on the streets in the Hollywood Hills. Eventually, someone called it in and it was taken to a tow yard. There, workers started to notice a foul smell coming from the Tesla. Inside, LAPD officials would find a heavily decomposed and dismembered body. About a week later, the medical examiner identified the remains as 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez. And we'll get into their alleged relationship shortly, because a lot came out at the prelim, but let's finish the timeline
Despite
first.
the discovery, Burke was not immediately arrested. Law enforcement publicly named him the prime suspect, but for months, that's where things stood publicly. Behind the scenes, a grand jury was convened in February 2026 to review the evidence. In April 2026, Burke was arrested and charged. He's been held without bail since.
Let's finish the timeline first. Now, it was odd. After a dismembered body was recovered in David's vehicle, and he wasn't arrested or charged. Law enforcement publicly acknowledged that David was the prime suspect in the investigation into Celeste's death, but that was it. At least publicly. Behind the scenes, investigators were hard at work. In February 2026, a grand jury was called in Los Angeles County to review the evidence against David, and eventually, in April 2026, David was arrested. The LA County District Attorney filed multiple charges against him, including first-degree murder with special circumstances, continuous sexual abuse of a minor, and unlawful mutilation. David was then taken into custody and has since been held without bail. Like I said, we've been following
The preliminary
this
hearing
case
exists
since
for
it
one
broke,
purpose: to
and
determine whether prosecutors have enough evidence to justify a trial. It's a much lower bar than an actual trial. At trial, the standard is proof beyond a reasonable doubt, something like a 99.9% certainty. At a preliminary hearing, prosecutors only need to establish probable cause, closer to a 51% threshold. It's also, in effect, a dry run. Both sides get to test their witnesses in front of a live audience under real pressure before the stakes get even higher.
It took place over the course of 5 days in Los Angeles court. Now, the purpose of the prelim is to determine whether there is enough evidence to hold up at jury trial. And the burden of proof here in a prelim is much less than a regular trial. There, it's proof beyond a reasonable doubt. But in a preliminary hearing, prosecutors only need to prove probable cause. Here's our reporter, Julia Dang.
The threshold here in this preliminary hearing phase is much lower. The prosecution only needs to show probable cause. Think of that as kind of like a 51% threshold. But if this does go to trial, in order for a jury to convict, that's got to be beyond a reasonable doubt. Think of that as
Day
more
one
like
began with autopsy photographs shown in open court for the first time. Images of Celeste's remains still inside the front trunk of that Tesla. Reporters in the room reportedly stopped taking notes. Celeste's parents were present, seated just a few rows from the press section, and her mother was seen bowing her head as the images were displayed.
To a live jury of their peers.
And it's clear the prosecution brought probable cause in this hearing. So let's start with day one of the prelim. That was Tuesday, July 21st. For the first time, gruesome autopsy photos were shown in open court.
Today, for the first time, we actually, in the courtroom, saw photos of that portion of the investigation. We actually saw the victim's remains in cadaver bags, still in the front trunk of that Tesla. It was something I don't think I have the words to describe. Reporters sitting in the courtroom actually stopped typing for a moment. There was a second where it felt like everybody just froze. And there was this too. For the first time today, we actually saw the parents of the victim, the mother and father of Celeste. They were both sitting in the courtroom. They were sitting directly in front of me. They were about 3 rows ahead of me. And I could see the victim's mother, Mercedes.
The first witness was a sheriff's deputy who had gone to Burke's Hollywood Hills home in February 2024 after Celeste. Then 13 was reported missing. Body camera footage showed Burke letting deputies inside and being shown a photo of Celeste on his own phone. He told them he'd met her online at the end of 2021 and hadn't seen her in months. He also claimed she had told him she was 18, not 13.
The first witness called was an LA County Sheriff's Department deputy who was called to David's home in the Hollywood Hills. Then 13-year-old Celeste out of Lake Elsinore, California, had been reported missing, and this deputy had to investigate.
So we heard from the senior deputy who actually went to the defendant's house up in the Hollywood Hills looking for this missing girl. Celeste would have been 13 at the time. We saw body camera footage of this senior deputy and his partner being let into that house by David, having a conversation with him, and then being shown photos on David's phone of Celeste. David said, yeah, he knew her. He met her online at the end of 2021. And he claimed to deputies that he hadn't seen her in months, but he pulled up her yearbook photo and said she told him.
That claim matters specifically because of the continuous sexual abuse charge. According to the family's attorney, this is what's known as a strict liability crime, meaning if an adult and a minor have a sexual relationship, the minor's stated age isn't a legal defense once the adult has actual knowledge of the truth. And prosecutors say Burke did have that knowledge at least as early as February 2024 when he was allegedly told directly that Celeste was 13.
She told him she was 18 and not 13.
Now, this is important because David was charged with continuous sexual abuse of a minor. Here's the Rivas Hernandez family attorney, Patrick Steinfeld.
David Anthony Burke has taken the position that Celeste said she was 18. He didn't know she was a child, but he knew because he was told in February of 2024 that Celeste was only 13 years old. This is a strict liability crime, meaning that if he's 18 and she's 13 and they're having sexual relations, that is automatically a crime. He does not have a defense. However, he had direct knowledge of Celeste's age and continued in their sexual relationship. So I find it abhorrent that the defense attorneys are trying to put any blame whatsoever on this young child.
The timeline prosecutors laid out goes back further than many expected. They say Burke and Celeste began talking online in 2021 when she was around 11 and he was 16 or 17. The relationship stayed virtual, according to prosecutors, until 2023 when they met in person for the first time. By early 2024, text messages presented in court showed the two discussing something they called Operation Awesome, a plan for Celeste to run away from her home in Lake Elsinore. According to testimony, it was Burke who repeatedly pushed the plan forward, asking if she had her bags packed, telling her what to bring, referring to the date of her planned departure as one of the most important days of her life. Second, he said only to their future wedding she was 13.
But first, let's go back to the revelations in the prelim. Now, prosecutors say David and Celeste started talking in 2021 when she would have been just 11 years old and David would have been 16 or 17. Now, they met via social media apps like Instagram and Discord, and for a while, prosecutors say their relationship remained virtual. That is, until 2023. They met reportedly for the first time in November of that year, and then tried to make it more permanent around Valentine's Day 2024. Celeste's parents then reported her missing on February 15th, 2024, and first responders did a wellness check at David's home the same month.
I think it also paints a great picture of just how convincing David can be as a liar, because when that body cam recording was taken in February of 2024, that's also the time period where we saw text message conversations today in court showing that David and Celeste were talking about something called OA, Operation Awesome, where they were plotting her departure, her runaway from her home in Lake Elsinore. And this struck me too. David appears to be the one pushing this. He's the one who keeps on asking her, do you have your bags packed? He tells her, bring everything you're going to use that I can immediately replace. Bring a bigger bag. Do you have everything packed? Are you ready to go? In one of these messages from that particular exchange, he calls that her runaway date, and I believe it was the day before Valentine's Day in 2024. He calls it the most important
Text messages
day.
also reference an abortion appointment in January 2024, timed to when Celeste would have been 13 years old. Photos shown in court, not sexual abuse material, but personal images, reportedly included Celeste wearing what appeared to be an engagement ring and a tattoo of Burke's name on her hand. Messages also showed Burke discussing having children with her.
She is only 13 years old. This is just a couple weeks after, memorialized in these text messages, she apparently had an abortion.
That shocking revelation was paired with a description of David and Celeste's relationship.
This is actually the first time during the course of this preliminary hearing where Celeste is being presented as a living human, a young girl who is very much alive, a young girl who has a voice, who is expressing her feelings, her wants, her needs. Before this, she was a bag of decomposing body parts. She was an autopsy subject. She was a collection of limbs that had been severed from each other. But this afternoon, she became human. Again, as we heard about these photos and saw some images that, of course, were not child sexual abuse material that could be shown to the court, we saw Celeste at age 13 with what appeared to be a diamond engagement ring on her left ring finger. That's the finger that had David's name tattooed on it in red ink. We saw photos of the two of them kissing and cuddling in bed. We saw selfies of the two of them. Celeste with her red hair.
The hearing then turned to motive for the murder charge itself. Prosecutors say Celeste had grown upset over Burke's association with another woman, an LA-based influencer named Asia Collins, who has publicly stated she never dated Burke and has said she wants justice for Celeste.
Murder.
Turns out Asia Collins, who is an LA-based influencer, social media model, she's got a presence and a platform online. Turns out it was her association with David and their rumored friendship or perhaps early stages of dating that made Celeste incredibly upset. And that is what Celeste cites as the source of her anger when she is threatening David and telling him over text the night before he sent the Uber to pick her up and deliver her to his home. She tells him over text that she's going to, quote, mutilate his penis. She tells him that she doesn't want to see one more instance of David being tagged in posts with Asia Collins. Asia did come out on the record and state publicly, after the charges were filed against David, that she never dated him. She also came out and says she wants justice for Celeste.
And
according to messages read in court, the night before Celeste was picked up by an Uber that Burke had called for her, she allegedly threatened him, saying she would ruin his career, contact his business associates and his mother, and expose the relationship.
And here's the key. The prosecution alleges Celeste was threatening David, saying she was going to expose him for child sexual abuse, and that's why he allegedly killed her.
In those messages that were shown to the court, that Detective Farrell read to us, Celeste tells David that she's going to ruin his career. She tells him that she's going to tell her father lies about him. She tells him that she has contact information for his business associates and for his mother. She tells him that she's going to call his mother, Colleen Burke, and tell her damaging information about David.
And prosecutors say David had a lot to lose financially.
And
prosecutors argue this is what triggered the killing. Burke stood to lose a career reportedly worth between $10 and $11.5 million in earnings over a 2-year span. That financial motive is tied to one of 3 special circumstances alleged in the case: murder for financial gain, which is part of what makes this a death penalty eligible case in California, even though the state has not carried out an execution since a moratorium began in 2019.
Around this budding artist with what's been described as a multi-million-dollar music career ahead of him. Well, let me give you the numbers this witness laid out. He says between 2023 and the end of 2025, David raked in gross earnings of $10 to $11.5 million. And he says that record label head made anywhere from $3.5 to $4 million off of just David. Now, why is this relevant? This goes back to that first-degree murder charge and the special circumstances around that charge. There are 3 of them. Those special circumstances mean this is eligible for the death penalty here in California, even though California technically halted executions back in 2019. So one of those 3 special circumstances include murder for financial gain.
Prosecutors allege Burke arranged for Celeste to be driven roughly 80 miles from her family's home to his in the Hollywood Hills on April 23, 2025, and that she was killed there. But the exact cause of death remains officially undetermined. The medical examiner ruled it a homicide caused by multiple penetrating injuries, but due to the advanced state of decomposition, could not identify the weapon or confirm the injuries were caused by a sharp instrument.
Prosecutors allege David killed Celeste on April 23, 2025. They say David called her an Uber to pick her up from her family's home in Lake Elsinore, California, and then drive her about 80 miles south to his home in the Hollywood Hills, where he allegedly murdered her. But here's where things get tricky. We can't say definitively how Celeste died.
They decided the cause and manner of death of 14-year-old Celeste Rivas Hernandez was homicide, and they attributed her death to multiple penetrating injuries. Here's what's interesting, though. They did not identify what kind of weapon or tool caused those penetrating injuries, and they stopped short of actually calling it a penetrating injury caused by a sharp instrument. So they're not saying that she was definitely stabbed to death. And that's because of the advanced...
The defense used this uncertainty to raise pointed questions, including asking the medical examiner whether the injuries could have been self-inflicted and whether Celeste's mental health history had been considered. The examiner acknowledged he had not spoken with her family about that history.
What's more, the defense posed an interesting question to the medical examiner, Dr. Grant Ho. Could Celeste have killed herself?
Marilyn Bednarski was the one asking Dr. Grant Ho these questions. She wanted to know first, is it helpful for somebody doing an autopsy to maybe have information about whether the decedent has a mental health history? Is it helpful to know if they are suicidal? Is it helpful to know if they are habitual drug users? So to each of those questions, Dr. Ho answered, potentially. So then she asked him, did you have any conversations with the decedent's relatives to explore those characteristics? He did not. So then she proceeded to ask about the injuries, right? The documented injuries, these penetrating wounds, the disruption to one of her ribs, the damage noted on her liver. And the defense wants to know, can you definitively link those observations that were made during the autopsy to what you see on the overlaying skin? And do you know exactly how that occurred? Are you able to definitively report that somebody else caused those injuries? And I think the broad answer to all of this is the advanced state of decomposition precludes a lot of definitive information. The deputy ME simply cannot say how this happened or who did this to her. I don't know if this is actually going to end up being a building block for an argument that Celeste killed herself, but it's certainly a line of questioning that I think any sharp defense attorney would
Chainsaws
explore.
recovered from Burke's home became a focus of cross-examination. None tested positive for blood. The defense questioned why investigators didn't test for touch DNA before ruling them out.
Would explore.
The medical examiner can't definitively say what was used to dismember Celeste's body, so that part is still a question mark too. Chainsaws were recovered in David's home, so that did seem like a possibility, but per an LA criminologist and their testimony, that doesn't really seem likely.
And there was a lot of back and forth about the chainsaws. And here's why. Defense attorney Blair Burke noted there was no positive test indicating the possibility of blood on those chainsaws. So she kept on asking this LAPD witness for the prosecution why they didn't take those chainsaws into evidence. It sounded like she wanted to make the point that touch DNA, which they didn't test for, may have indicated something else, may have painted a more comprehensive picture of what exactly happened and who may have been involved, who else may have been involved, that is. But the criminalist was very sharp, very clear with her answers.
After
Separately, testimony revealed blood found in the garage's brick flooring beneath rubber mats. Evidence prosecutors say points to blood having leaked from the Tesla's trunk. Investigators also found multiple air fresheners placed near the trunk, which they say points to an attempt to mask the smell of decomposition.
A selection.
Celeste's remains were recovered in the Tesla months later, on September 8th, 2025. On day 2 of the prelim, the court heard harrowing testimony about the recovery of her remains in the Tesla.
We haven't heard about this detail before. According to this testimony from one of those two LAPD criminalists, there was actually blood identified in the brick flooring underneath where a car would have been parked. And that was underneath black rubber mats that were laid down on the garage floor in David's house. So what they seem to be painting a picture of here is blood leaking out of David's Tesla, seeping through those rubber floor mats, and then seeping down into that brick flooring. Hearing that, and sitting right behind the victim's parents, it was jarring. There is so much evidence in this case that has been unsettling in truly shocking ways that I don't think I've experienced before anywhere. But being, in that courtroom with the victim's parents, I think that drives home the point that this is about a human, this is about a teenager, this is about a girl who was killed and dismembered. This is about justice for her. So this isn't just about how Celeste was killed, how her body was then mutilated. This is also about the cover-up efforts. I mean, somebody must have noticed, oh, it smells. terrible. We got to do something to cover that up. So somebody actually opened up the front trunk, reportedly with the remains inside, and then put
After the
air
alleged
freshener.
killing, prosecutors say Burke texted Celeste's phone asking where she was, an apparent attempt to build an alibi. Cell phone and vehicle data reportedly show his phone and Tesla traveling together towards Santa Barbara County, the same area where Celeste's passport was later recovered. The defense countered that this data proves the phone and car moved, not necessarily that Burke was the one driving or carrying the phone. No surveillance footage, eyewitness, or direct evidence has been presented publicly placing Burke at the scene at the moment of the killing. The Los Angeles County District Attorney has said this is a circumstantial case, but has also said only a fraction of the evidence was presented at this stage.
After David allegedly killed Celeste, prosecutors say he attempted to make a fake alibi, texting Celeste's phone asking, "Where are you at?" After that, David's phone and Tesla are both recorded heading 95 miles northwest to Santa Barbara County, the same place where Celeste's passport and personal items would later be recovered.
Now, I had questions when I first read some of the charging documents about why in the world anybody would take their own car, especially a car tricked out with software like a Tesla, to do anything that might be criminal. And on top of that, not just their car, but their iPhone. According to data they analyzed, traveled from the Hollywood Hills west along Sunset Boulevard and then north up the coast into Santa Barbara County. He's testifying how the path of that Tesla, again, according to his analysis of data, matches the path of David's iPhone. Same time, same day, same location. And he's testifying how that matches up with where Celeste's passport card was later found, right by Lake Cachuma off of State Road 154 in Santa Barbara County.
And the defense says, okay, David's car and iPhone were making that trip, sure, but we can't prove it was David himself in the car with that phone.
We haven't seen any definitive proof yet that links David to the actual murder. We haven't seen any video that actually shows him committing that alleged act. We haven't heard from any witnesses who say they watched it happen. That is missing. We don't know what else they may present. This preliminary hearing, of course, is just one step in the process. This is not all of their evidence. These are not all of their witnesses. It's just a selection.
There was also courtroom drama unrelated to the forensic evidence. A private investigator, Steve Fisher, was excluded from testifying after the prosecution alleged he violated grand jury secrecy rules, a claim he disputes, saying investigators are not bound by the same confidentiality as grand jurors themselves.
To not be in the courtroom.
On day 3, there was some drama in the courtroom, specifically about a witness who was no longer allowed to be called.
Now, according to the prosecutor in this case, the deputy DA, Beth Silverman, apparently Steve Fisher violated grand jury secrecy. And because of that, she made a request this morning for him to be excluded from the witness list. He was in the courtroom. He was sitting right by me. He stood up, acknowledged that request. There wasn't any kind of pushback. There was no argument there. And he walked out. So we're not going to hear from Steve Fisher in the courtroom as part of this preliminary hearing. But obviously, if this goes to trial, we do expect to hear
Throughout
from
the
him.
hearing, Burke reportedly remained largely composed, still quiet, giving little away. Observers noted one exception: when explicit images found on his phone were described in court, he appeared to fidget and his leg was seen shaking.
A judge ultimately ruled that David's case will be taken to trial.
This was difficult evidence to even hear, but also the crime that we are dealing with is incredibly horrific and barbaric. And it's not shocking that the evidence that would prove a horrific and barbaric crime would itself also be very difficult to deal with and to watch and listen to. But that is the evidence. We'll make sure that the jury eventually has all the evidence in order to reach a verdict in this case.
But before we move on to our interview with expert Jesse Weber, I have to talk about David's demeanor. A judge ruled he didn't have to be handcuffed, but he still needed to be shackled. And for the most part, he was pretty calm and emotionless in the courtroom, with a few notable exceptions, like this one.
When they were describing the incredibly explicit images of David and Celeste engaged in various types of sexual activity found on David's phone, I noticed David losing his composure a little bit. The entire time that I've been watching him in court during this hearing and the status conferences before this, he has been very still, very composed, staring straight ahead, responding when spoken to, and not giving away much with his body language or his facial expressions. Today, when they were talking about the photos, when they were talking about his dick pics, you could see him starting to fidget. It was like he was shrinking in his seat. He looked down at one point. I could see his right leg jiggling up and down.
The judge ultimately ruled there was sufficient evidence for the case to proceed to trial. Burke is due back in court on August 31st for arraignment. Prosecutors have not yet said whether they will pursue the death penalty. A trial date has not been set, and legal analysts following the case suggest it may not begin until 2027. Until then, every claim outlined here remains an allegation. One a jury, not a preliminary hearing, will ultimately have to weigh.